So a lot of people have asked me how I simplify my anatomy, which is something I've had to refine over and over again throughout my years of drawing. Despite being a tall order, I figured I'd try to explain my process of constructing the human form and the technical thought behind it as well. I want to preface this by saying I'm by no means a master of anatomy, just someone who's studied it a lot in and outside of school. I still don't have all the muscles or anything memorized, though, so some of this might not be the most anatomically accurate. I also want to say that before learning to simplify anatomy, you should learn the fundamentals of it. If you don't understand the basic muscles and proportions, your anatomy will turn out wonky regardless. Getting a base knowledge of anatomy is the first step to successfully stylizing it. With that being said, let's start this video by talking about anatomy resources. One of the main ways I learned anatomy was through Proko's anatomy videos. I'll link the playlist below, but it goes over the parts of the skeleton and muscles you'll need to know as an artist. He does a great job simplifying muscles, grouping them together into what will be visible on the human form and what artists need to know. Don't worry if you can't understand everything at first. I first watched these videos when I was younger, and despite copying everything down in my sketchbook, I didn't really understand it fully. It served as a good introduction to anatomy though, and later when I came back to these videos years later, I understood them a lot better. Now, just copying down what you learn in the muscle diagrams isn't enough to actually learn the muscles. What my most effective method of study has been is finding the muscles in reference photos to see how they look in real life. Find some photos. If you need some suggestions, then Line of Action has some nude models, and look for different angles and different motions, since some muscles flex or relax depending on the action. After this, try to locate the different muscles in the photo. For example, in this reference, I use my knowledge of anatomy and visual cues to find the deltoid, bicep, tricep, and brachialis. You can try this on a variety of body types, but if you want to make it easy for yourself, go find some muscular references. My favorite supplemental resource is Anatomy for Sculptors, Understanding the Human Figure. This book shows every angle of the human figure and what each muscle looks like from every angle and during every action. It's incredibly thorough and great to use if you're struggling to find certain muscles or understand how they work. This exercise not only forces you to apply your knowledge of muscles to real-life photos, but forces you to think of muscles as 3D objects. Being able to understand what muscles look like from different angles and positions is key to fully registering it in your mind and helps you remember muscles far better than simple copy and paste. If you really want to study hard, one assignment I had in school was to find a reference photo, draw the skeleton, draw the muscles over it, and then draw the reference as a whole. This was pretty difficult, but in the long run, it really helped me understand anatomy a lot more and is a great exercise. If you want some other books to study from, I also highly recommend the Morpho-Anatomy books. They have books on specific body parts you might be struggling with, as well as simplified and complex anatomy books. I also enjoy T.B. Choi's Design Your Own Anime and Characters book, which really simplifies and stylizes anatomy in a way I've integrated into my own work. With that, hopefully you have a good start to understanding the fundamentals of anatomy, so now we can move on to how I draw the human form. Before I continue, I want to note that not everything in this section will be anatomically accurate. This is how I personally stylize my anatomy, and I still make a lot of anatomical mistakes or deliberate changes in my style that conflict with normal human anatomy. So definitely don't come away from this thinking everything I'm saying is completely anatomically accurate, and definitely consult anatomy books and professionals if you want the most accurate information. Besides, the best way to use art tips is as a supplemental resource to working on your fundamentals. Now, I've experimented a lot with how I construct the human body. You may have heard of the bean method, robo-bean, boxes, etc. My style of construction is similar to boxes, but I use a more triangular shape for the chest since I find it more dynamic and useful. But rather than just show you, I think it's better to explain why and how I use this. To put it simply, I simplify the body into 3 different parts: the rib cage, the pelvis, and all the mushy stuff. Let's go into more detail on these 3 parts. Now, when simplified, the rib cage normally has a more egg-like appearance. However, skin and muscle cover it, so the actual rib cage shape isn't that important, more so just knowing that this top shape is the rib cage. Many people simplify the chest as a box, which I somewhat use, but I choose a more triangular shape because of the muscle surrounding the chest. If you don't know, the latissimus dorsi muscle gives the body this more triangular look. I found that when tracing over pictures of people, using this triangular shape can encompass the latissimus dorsi and just generally feels more dynamic to me than using a box. I'll explain that latter point further in a bit, but let me cover the other 2 first. The pelvis is usually simplified as a box in most methods, given the complex complex appearance and how it just generally looks like a box when covered with skin and muscle, so I use this method as well, not much to say there. Now onto all the mushy stuff. This box is what I just consider the stomach since there isn't any landmark bones here. This box is what I very often when drawing different body types, which I'll show in a bit. It might make more sense with more examples, but essentially it's just the stomach. As for the rest of the body, I don't really have a unique method to doing it. I split the arms and legs in two and just try to keep general proportion knowledge, like the elbows being at the waist and fingertips going to mid-thigh. What I also like to do though is make the legs the same length as the top of the chest to the bottom of the pelvis. Sometimes I make the legs longer or shorter depending on the body type, but I just use that as a frame of reference for about how long they should be. I don't know if that's entirely anatomically accurate, but I remember picking it up from tracing over photos of people and seeing that it was just a general measurement I could use, because I don't like really using heads for measurement. So that's generally what I use to construct bodies, but that's just one piece of the puzzle. The reason I prefer this method is the versatility in body types you can draw with this, which I will explain in the next section. Focusing back on the 3 body building blocks, I will often alter them to fit the specific body type I want. For example, when drawing someone more buff, I usually exaggerate the triangle and make the shoulders a lot wider. If I wanted to make someone skinny, I'd usually do the opposite, making their chest much more box-like. Technically speaking, this is because bigger muscles make the shoulders look wider, but in an artistic sense, it's always fun to exaggerate different parts of the body even to unrealistic points. I also usually add in the trapezius on top of this box shape, which is what makes the top part of your body have that triangular appearance, and just make it bigger or smaller depending on how muscular they are. Usually on more muscular people it looks inflated, and other times it can have a more sloping appearance. I also do the same with the mushy stuff, making the stomach area bigger or smaller depending on the body type. One thing to note is that when drawing someone with a large stomach, I don't draw them like this. If you remember, I told you that remembering this top triangular box represents the ribcage is important. Knowing that means you can recognize fat sits on top of the ribcage, not under, starting at or slightly below the breasts. Usually I'll map out the breasts or pecs, using them as a good landmark for adding stomach fat, abs, or just figuring out how to detail the stomach area. There's a reason I explained every building block I use for construction and which body part it represents, because having knowledge of the ribcage underneath and how muscles and fat sit on top of it gives me a good idea of how to properly utilize my construction and apply it to different body types effectively. Despite being a triangle, I still recognize where the ribcage is underneath, how it works, and it just shows how critical fundamental muscle knowledge is. The saying is true that you need to know your fundamentals if you want to simplify them, because this knowledge is something I use very often. Here are some more examples of my construction and how I use it, showing how I can alter it to fit my needs. Not only can you experiment with the chest and torso, but also the limbs, playing with the length and making tons of fun and expressive body types. Now that I showed you what I use and how I use it, the last thing I need to explain is stylization, the thing that can really differentiate you from other artists. Some styles have certain hallmarks, like a lot of doll brands have extra long legs, Panty and Stocking have really chunky legs and big hands, and a lot of anime and chibi styles have larger heads than normal. I mainly stick to a more realistic approach as far as anatomy goes, which may seem hard to stylize, but I ended up taking some notes from Spider-Verse when figuring out how to add some uniqueness to how I draw bodies. I would often take stills from the Spider-Verse movies and draw the poses in them, trying to learn from their style since it was such a huge influence for me. By doing this, I discovered the unique way they draw bodies, specifically limbs. When you think of drawing the human body, your mind will usually go to curves. There are no straight lines in the human body, everything is a curve. However, what Spider-Verse would do is add straight lines to the human body, making everything seem much more shapely and appealing. This blend of curved and straight lines can be great for emphasizing actions, as well as just providing some necessary contrast that captures your eye and makes things appear more dynamic. The human eye is always drawn to contrast, and using that philosophy when it comes to anatomy has really elevated the way I draw. You can see this in a lot of my studies. I use a combination of more curved and straight lines, making everything into appealing shapes. I use this the most when drawing arms and legs, rather than making them basic cylinders. This is just how I stylize my anatomy, something I learned from studying a certain style I like. This section is not just to explain the stylization I use, but to also give an example of how you can stylize your own. But to explain this further, let's go to the conclusion. In making this video, my purpose was not to show my method of drawing and say that it's the best and everyone should do it. Rather, to show my process of constructing bodies and explain the use and how I got to that point. Really, I wanted to help people find their own way of constructing bodies and stylizing anatomy, because this isn't a one-size-fits-all way of drawing. Nothing is. My way of drawing was built up by consuming tons of media I like, references, art books, and just going about daily life and people watching. I started off with the box method, then springboarded off that way of drawing to find the way I like drawing most and what works best for me. Then, even further fine-tuning that and adapting it to different body types. Hopefully, by sharing all this, even if my method doesn't click for you, it can give you some ideas to start finding the way you draw best, or just allow you to springboard off my method and find your own way like I did before. The best thing I can recommend is to start with your fundamental learning of anatomy and muscles, then just look at tons of different references and body types and drawing them, using different methods of constructing the body to see which fits best. That's the way I learned, tracing over the reference when something looked off so I could better see how to break down the body and where my mistakes were. That's also how I learned how to adapt my construction, seeing how to make it fit different body types and changing it when needed. And this doesn't even have to apply to real reference photos. I take drawings from the artists I like and I'll try to figure out what construction they used and how they break down bodies, and using that in my own style. That's also how I developed my way of drawing bodies. Hopefully that all makes sense, since this video might be a bit disjointed given how much ground I needed to cover and all the anatomical explanations that might be confusing. I know a lot of people have been asking me how I draw bodies, so I wanted to deliver that, but also give people the tools they needed to find their own way or adapt it the way they like. After all, if you don't understand the construction you use, then it's useless, and I don't want people using some way of constructing that they don't like or that doesn't click with them. But with that, there's my breakdown of anatomy. Thank you guys for all the support on my last video. I really wasn't expecting it. And it seems some people found that video independently of my TikTok, which was pretty cool. Hopefully the audio is better. This is the third time I'm recording this because there was too much background noise and then I sounded like I was dead inside. So hopefully third time's a charm. Let's hope this goes well, and hopefully the music is better. I got critique on that. And yeah, I don't know what happened. Like, it sounded very quiet to me, and then listening to it again, I was like, wow, this is loud, so I'm gonna be careful this time, and hopefully it's fine. But yeah, if anyone has any suggestions for videos or topics you want me to cover, tutorial related or not, feel free to put it in the comments. I was thinking about redoing my how to draw old people video from TikTok, or I finally learned how to draw kids and babies, so maybe some tips on that. And also I have some tips on being like an OC artist, since I managed to find some success doing OC art rather than fandom art, because fandom art for me is like pulling nails. I can't do that. But yeah, that's all from me. I could ramble on forever about stuff, but I've been doing that enough this video. So thank you guys for watching, and bye!